Mike Gill, Hunter Brody, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, at Mike Gill Show on Twitter, at Broads81. Give us a follow, play along. The MGPT Top 5 at 5 tonight. Our top 5 TV moms. Happy Mother's Day, belated to all the moms out there. All right, Andrew DiCecco, 97.3 ESPN.com, InsideTheBirds.com. He's got a post up right now on our website, 4 dark horse candidates to make the Eagles' 53-man roster. Now, these are always fun to kind of take a look at because these are guys that most people would not have heard of. Now, I'm going to let Andrew kind of go down his list of guys, and then I got some other ones I want to throw his way to kind of get his take on them. So let's bring Andrew DiCecco in right now on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. He, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. What's up, Andrew? Sorry about that. What's up, man? That's my fault.
Hey, no problem. How you guys doing today?
We're all good, man. And I know this is the kind of year, this is the time of year where, typically everything kind of slows down and there's that third wave of free agency out there where teams are just trying to add those veterans that haven't, been picked up yet. But you have a list of guys who are already on the team that many of our listeners may not have heard of, but you think are kind of interesting. So give us a couple of names that are kind of dark horses to you to maybe make this team and maybe have a little bit of a role.
Yeah, one player I really like is Elijah Holyfield. He's a player that I had profiled last, I guess it was the 2019 draft, as somebody who I like. He's a little bit raw. He didn't get a ton of carries, obviously, at Georgia with Sonny Michel. And it was a crowded backfield there. But I think that he kind of developed more as a pass catcher with the Carolina Panthers last summer. The Eagles signed him on New Year's Eve last year. He didn't play in the Seattle game, but he does have some months there in the playbook, and he's kind of familiar with the system now. I think he could kind of be in play. If you look at the roster, you have Miles Sanders, you have Boston Scott, but you really don't have that downhill between the tackles runner, which is an element that he brings, and he thrived in that role at Georgia. Corey Clements re-signed, but he's not really that ideal, guy to grind out those tough yards. And even, you heard this morning that the Eagles are interested in Carlos Hyde, which is a player that I talked about with Seth Joyner in past weeks as a veteran that I would target. You look at him, possibly Devontae Freeman that could also fill that role. But for that fourth running back spot, I think Elijah Holyfield has physical tools that are worth developing. And looking further down that list that I had, Elijah Riley is an interesting player. He's a cornerback from Army. His numbers are outstanding for his 4-year career. He's a ball magnet, very tough, instinctive player. He really impressed me at the Shrine Bowl. I was watching the defensive back drills, and I was like, wait a second, who is this guy? And immediately after the Shrine Bowl, I went home and, I did a lot of film study on him. And he's an interesting player that I think that when you look at the NFL, you want to have as many quality corners as you can. You don't want to be that team that suffers a rash of injuries and your season's kind of determined based on that. So I think that when you see the upside that he has a skill set that's kind of worth, he can be like their new developmental project in place of Rasul Douglas potentially.
Yeah, now one thing about Riley that I guess people should know and understand why he's an intriguing prospect is because of where he went to school. And typically, if you play at Army, you don't get the opportunity to come right into the NFL, but that's different for him. And he's a guy that you mentioned, the numbers. If you look at his numbers, you'd be like, holy mackerel, how was this guy not a first-round pick with some of the numbers that he have? But it's a very unusual situation that the football player from Army can come right into the league and get an opportunity.
Yeah, and another alluring skill set that he brings is, he is a bigger player. He's just 6 foot, I believe 205, and he does have that versatility to when I first saw him, he looked like a safety. He had the body type of a safety, but he had the range and fluidity and the fluid hips to kind of turn and run with receivers that made him such a good cornerback. But I think that he also presents that versatility. So if the Eagles go with 4 safeties, which, as I'm going through the roster in the roster preview that I did with Jeff Mosher for InsideTheBirds.com, I think they can conceivably keep 4 safeties, but if you keep 6 corners, I think a guy like Elijah Riley can give you that safety versatility, like maybe like a player like Rasul Douglas can't, or he would have done it by now.
Absolutely. I think that would be a great idea for the Eagles to bring in as much versatility because you might be able to utilize Jalen Mills differently. If, this is a long-term project, but if you have that philosophy, you might be able to utilize these different players in totally different ways. Tell me a little bit about the Michigan State defensive tackle Williams and what he could possibly bring to the table.
Yeah, he's a player that I mentioned in the 97.3 article over the weekend. And I actually, when I did my 53-man roster projection that came out today for InsideTheBears.com, I put him on there as the fifth DT. He's a guy that I think will contend with Anthony Rush and the Albert Huggins of the world in training camp. I think it should be a three-man battle. I was shocked that he went undrafted. He's a 42-game starter for Michigan State, right in the middle of that defensive line. More known as more of a run stuffer, but he did have 5 sacks last year, and I got to see him at the Shrine Bowl as well. He really impressed me in the one-on-one drills. Very, very active hands, physical player. He gets under the pad level of the offensive lineman, and I think that there's a skill set there worth developing. And you look in past years, the Eagles have suffered. The defensive tackle position has always come into the season, very stacked. But, you get into the first few weeks of the season, all of a sudden the position's ravaged, and you're relying on guys like Destiny Bayo and T.Y. McGill and Albert Huggins and Anthony Rush and Bruce Hector. So I think when you have a developmental player like that you might not want to risk exposing to waivers, I think you can make a case for keeping somebody like Raekwon Williams.
Yeah, and he's a guy, real quick on him. I thought if he would have came out as a junior, he may have been, as you mentioned, you were surprised he wasn't drafted. He might have been not only drafted, but a middle-round draft choice had he come out. He had a really good junior year, and he kind of slipped off a little bit as a senior.
Yeah, it was one of those things where when I'm going through the draft, as I'm, Tony and Pauline and I are providing analysis for all 255 picks, and I get to the end of it, I'm like, wait a second. They didn't call Raekwon Williams his name. How is that possible? And then when I saw that he signed with Philadelphia, I thought that he was just a tremendous steal. And I think a guy that may have gotten a little bit overlooked, in the undrafted free agency, in the wave of undrafted free agents. But I think that he can be a guy that's going to factor into the roster, depending on what we get out of training camp, if there even is one.
Yeah, real quick on that. That's something interesting to bring up, how that could affect all these rookies, guys who are undrafted rookie free agents, guys who are back end, and even the high draft choices that they're not getting the reps that they typically would be in like rookie mini camp right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And that's one thing that I kind of caution many fans to kind of take into consideration when they're placing these expectations on a lot of these rookies. Wide receiver in particular is a very tough position to get a grasp on with a full offseason, let alone an abbreviated one. As you saw with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, the light started to come on towards the end of the season, and he's a guy I expect to take a significant leap forward in year 2. But when you're looking at guys like Jalen Reagor and John Hightower and Quez Watkins and some of those guys, I think that this abbreviated offseason is really going to impact them from a development standpoint, where they're going to be, behind a steep learning curve here, and because we don't know what we're going to get, and it's going to be virtual really, and until we get some more clarity on it. But it's going to be shortened for sure, and I think that's one thing that rookies, not just receivers, rookies around the NFL in general. I think that you're going to see many of them get off to slow starts and probably come on in the second half of the season as they start to get their legs under them and get a grasp of what's fully going on.
You have some offensive line on this list, and I just want to get your thoughts on where he compares to, say, Jack Driscoll and Prince, who they drafted in this year's draft. I love the way that the Eagles draft their linemen late. It seems like they hit on them. Vaitai and Sayamala was in the 3rd round, so I really enjoy the way that they draft their linemen. What do you have to say about him compared to the players that they actually took in the draft?
Well, I would say that both Auburn linemen are intriguing. I think Jack Driscoll was at the Shrine Bowl. He's a right tackle for Auburn, but I believe that he's ultimately going to be a better fit at guard and possibly center at the NFL level. And the other one, Prince Teo Wanago, he's going to be more of a developmental prospect. He's coming off of arthroscopic knee surgery that he had in January. So and given how raw he is, I'm not necessarily sure that he's going to be in their immediate plans. Could be a potential IR stash. So Jack Driscoll is a guy who I think can step in, not right away, but when comparing him to like a Luke Juriga from Western Michigan, like I put on that list, Luke has really impressed me as somebody who could play center. He could play, and he spent his first 3 years at right guard. Very athletic player, a little bit on the undersized build, but he's very athletic and moves really well laterally. I think he kind of reminds me of. I get the Nate Herbig vibe from last summer, who was last summer's feel-good story, making the team as an undrafted free agent. And I think that'll actually be his direct competition this summer.
Andrew DiCecco is with us here, looking at some of the possible dark horse candidates to make the Eagles roster. And you can check out that full article and get his take at 97.3ESPN.com. You know, last week we kind of stumbled into some dark horse stuff as we were just kind of looking through this roster and looking through this depth chart. And corner is a very interesting spot where, you know, obviously you got Slay that's going to definitively be on one side, and then you're looking around, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, you got obviously Avonte Maddox, Cre'Von LeBlanc, Sidney Jones, and Rasul Douglas, as many people remember. But what about Trevor Williams as a dark horse guy? I don't even know that people remembered that they signed him back in January, but he was a guy. I didn't even know they picked him up, by the way. When I saw the list, I said, where did they get Trevor Williams? In 2016, 2017 with I guess it was San Diego back then, he was a pretty darn good player. Yeah, he was a pretty darn good player. So do you look at him as a guy who's in the mix at that corner spot?
I do. When you look at Trevor Williams, he has the size and the physical traits that you look for in a boundary player. He's suffered a lot of injuries, and you know the Eagles haven't had much luck dealing with injuries. But in Trevor's case, he dealt with a lot of them with the Chargers, and he'll have to. When he did play, he was very effective, but he's going to need to be able to stay on the field and catch up with that playbook in order to get ahead of things, especially being so far down the depth chart. Another player, Mike, that I would also say falls into that category is Tremont Smith, who the Eagles signed. I believe it was to a futures contract at the end of the season. He was with the Chiefs and with the Packers, but he's going to make more of an impact as a kick returner. I believe he made the all-rookie team as a kick returner with the Chiefs, and they even experimented with him as running back last summer. So he has a lot of athleticism there to work with. So I think he'll be another name to keep to be mindful of.
All right, Andrew, we'll leave you with this. As you guys over Inside the Birds, Adam Kaplan reported that the Eagles looking for a veteran running back, and Carlos Hyde was the name specifically that Adam thinks that they were most interested in. He mentioned a couple other ones, LaShawn McCoy, Devonta Freeman, but what do you think about the possibility of how a guy like Carlos Hyde would fit into this offense?
I think he would fit well, to be honest. You really need – he's going to be the guy that's going to pick up those tough yards, because when you look at obviously Miles Sanders is ready to handle the lion's share of the carries this year, but you're a hamstring injury away or a tweak here or there from having Boston Scott and Corey Clement as your primary ball carriers. You kind of want to get a veteran in the mix there, and I think when you look at Carlos Hyde, he's been on a lot of teams. He's kind of bounced around a little bit. I believe it was 5 teams in 5 years. He's only had 1,000-yard season, but he brings a lot to the table as far as that veteran presence, that physical, downhill mindset that I think is lacking on the depth chart when you look at it. And I think that when kind of assessing all the needs, I think when you really need that plotter, he's okay in the passing game. But, you really just, at that point, you have Boston Scott and Miles Sanders that are efficient in that role. I think you really need that between the tackles guy.
Yeah, that should be an interesting storyline to keep an eye on, because it was May 17th, 2017, when the Eagles brought in LeGarrette Blount. So we'll see if they go down that road this week and try to fill that veteran running back. Andrew DiCecco, follow him at DiCecco NFL on Twitter, and you can read his stuff now at 97.3ESPN.com, also InsideTheBirds.com, and he'll be contributing much more here on the Sports Bash as we get you ready for the offseason and the now 2020 season ahead. Andrew, great stuff, man. Appreciate it.
Anytime, guys. Take care.
Andrew DiCecco, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. He's got great insight, especially on the draft stuff. That's one of the things, too, that having Andrew on board to talk about these younger guys and some draft stuff